Alright, this is part 4 of number 8 in chapter Program Challenge number 5. So everything's in memory. If you look at, this is the sum, this will take care of the sum, and will update your sum even, update the counter, which is your loop control variables. This is your counter, it needs to be less than or equal to the second number. Now, if you notice inside this loop, I just want to point out a couple of things that's very important here. There's a difference between part B and part C. The major difference I want to point out in this thing is that in your while loop right here, your while loop points out the fact that it outputs every iteration inside of this loop. So that's why you have a C out. You can see the odd numbers coming out with separated by a space. This right here, part C, you don't have any C out. You're going to do a C out in this loop because it only wants the sum, the final, which is what? This right here, the sum of the even. That's what the final number is. So in order to do that outside of your right curly bracket with this thing, you would actually have a C out, and you're going to do sum of the even integers between, let's give this some sort of, what is our first number, and you're going to do this with another string second number, put an equal to this, and now you want to output this memory right here. You don't want to see all the math or the guts and all that stuff with it. You just want to see what is the last number in that memory with it. Alright, again, you do an inline, so it just moves the cursor down to the next line for me. So that wraps up part C with this thing. I want to snag this part. Make sure you actually still have separated out for me. Would help a lot that I can actually, my grading with this. So just change that to D, and this is going to be part D here when you output this thing. Okay? So when you take a look at this part right here, this is the next part. It talks about a little bit more, sum of the squares. So part D says output the number and their squares between 1 and 10. So you got what they basically want. I envision this, I don't know, but I assume you have a column with 1, right? And all the column's gonna go down to, and it's gonna, I don't know, I'm gonna just start the next column. Square of 1 is what? 1. Come over, you're gonna do 2, increment 2, add 1 to it. Square 2 is 4. You see where I'm going with this? So the first number is going to be this, alright, until the last number, the second number, is going to be whatever the bottom is. So let's say you did 1, in my case I picked 1, and my second number is 10. This is the column, the first column is 1, 2, and 3 is my, all the way down to 10, and 10 squared is 100. Okay, so you can see how I think that's my understanding of that problem. How it works with it. So you do all of this on 2 separate columns with it. So you're going to basically have it increment square it. At this time you haven't learned, this is chapter 5, you haven't learned any library files for the C math, so don't bother to do anything fancy with it. To square a number, just take the 2 variables and multiply it to each other. Okay? So here's what we do. This is basically what we ultimately want to output, is something like this with it. So let's take a look at what we want to do with this thing. First thing what I need to do is I need to maybe create some, the column, the table. I'm going to call this table header. Okay, so you can do something like a C out with something along the line, with a string, and you might have to play with these spaces a little bit. Here's your number, and kind of bump it over a little bit more, give it some space, square of a number. Okay, like that. Okay, and inline. So this is equivalent to your table header with this thing. Next, remember now, your while loop, you got to do all this in your while loop. Your while loop has to have 3 things. First of all is the your initialization. Second one is what? Inside that, you need to test it. So your initialization statement goes here. And in your initialization statement for this thing, I want to point out is what? Your counter, right? So in this case, you've declared counter up here already. Look, here's your counter. All you need to do, you have to initialize this thing to equal to 1. And I'm going to do a while. I'm going to test that counter. I'm going to test that counter. Counter has to be less than what? How many iteration? Less than equal to 10. It tells me it wants to print from 1 to 10. That's all. That's my understanding with it, right? So you come down here. Inside of this, you got to do something to multiply it out to take the count of this thing. So I kind of gave you a little column header here. Okay, it goes back to chapter 3. Remember in chapter 3, what do you need to print out column spaces and all that stuff? So you remember the set W with a space with it? Remember when you use that method for a set W? Set W requires you to have what library file? IOmanip. So up here besides the pound include, you will also need what? Pound include IOmanip. Okay, and your IO, of course, IO stream is this one here, right? So IO stream. All right. So both of these you will need. You will need both of these up here. This is for part. What part are we doing? C? No, D. Okay. So this is for part D. So inside of this thing, I'm going to write my first line, right? So I'm going to do what? How do I get it out? I do cout set W. Give it, I don't know, 5. Meaning this is going to be right justified, right? And then you're going to output what's the first one? Your counter, right? Which should be 1, correct? You're going to do a set W. You're going to do what? Let's give it, I don't know, 10. Let's do 15. I'm in the mood for counting 5s by 5 now. And then you do, and then you're going to output this time. Remember now, set 5 starts with a 1. So bump over right justify 1, go over 15 columns over. You're going to do what? Multiply, take the counter, multiply, square it. That's what they want you to do, right? So counter times counter. Okay? In line. So that's one statement. So tell it to do something will complete this. You need to update counter. And the same. You do update counter. So you have to add 1 counter to this thing. So you can do what? Counter plus 1. This is the long way of writing it. Or you can do counter, lowercase counter, increment, plus plus. Means the same thing. Alright? Either statement will do fine with it. So you got this part right here. Let me check out my time here.